The tension in the congressional hearing room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat at the witness table, her burgundy blazer sharp against the mahogany backdrop, facing down the most powerful man in America. The ornate chamber, with its towering marble columns and gallery packed with reporters, felt electric with anticipation. What started as a routine oversight hearing was about to explode into the political confrontation of the decade. Donald Trump, appearing via video link from his opulent Mar-a-Lago estate, had been growing increasingly agitated as Crockett methodically picked apart his administration's policies. His face was getting redder with each pointed question, his hands gesturing wildly at the camera. Behind him, the golden curtains and crystal chandeliers of his Florida compound created a stark contrast to the serious government business at hand. The other committee members sat transfixed, sensing that something unprecedented was building. Republicans shifted nervously in their leather chairs, while Democrats leaned forward, recognizing that their colleague was methodically building a case that Trump couldn't escape. Then it happened. "You know what, Congresswoman?" Trump's voice boomed through the speakers, causing several people in the gallery to jump. "You're a nobody, a complete nobody who got lucky in some little district in Texas." The room went dead silent. You could hear pin drop. Security guards at the doors tensed. Reporters' fingers froze over their keyboards. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something that would change everything. But what Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just stun Trump into silence. It left the entire nation talking for weeks. This wasn't just a political exchange. This was the moment a young black congresswoman from Dallas took on the former president, and won in spectacular fashion. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these jaw-dropping political moments that are reshaping America. The House Oversight Committee hearing was supposed to be routine, another boring Wednesday morning in Washington examining government spending. But when Donald Trump agreed to testify via video link about his administration's use of federal resources, everyone knew fireworks were possible. The hearing room was packed. C-SPAN cameras rolled. Political reporters filled the press gallery, their fingers hovering over their phones, ready to tweet the next viral moment. This wasn't just any hearing. This was prime-time political theater. At 42 years old, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett represented everything that made Trump's base uncomfortable. A brilliant black woman from South Dallas, she had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the most effective freshman representatives in Congress. Crockett wasn't your typical politician. Before Congress, she was a civil rights attorney who had taken on police brutality cases that others wouldn't touch. She grew up in St. Louis, daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. Jasmine had earned her law degree while working nights at a hotel to pay for school. Her colleagues knew her as someone who did her homework. She didn't grandstand for cameras. She built airtight cases with facts and evidence. When Jasmine Crockett asked you a question, you better have your receipts ready because she definitely had haze. In Congress, she had quickly earned a reputation as someone who wouldn't back down from anyone. Not leadership, not special interests, and definitely not former presidents who thought they could intimidate her. Trump was appearing from his Mar-a-Lago estate, sitting in his familiar high-back leather chair with golden curtains behind him. At 77, he was used to dominating every room he entered, even virtually. The ornate background, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and gold-plated fixtures, seemed designed to remind everyone of his wealth and status. For decades, he had bulldozed through opponents with his larger-than-life personality and willingness to say things others wouldn't dare. His media team had carefully staged a shot to project power and success. The lighting was perfect, his makeup flawless, his red tie knotted precisely. This wasn't just a hearing appearance. It was a performance designed to remind America of the Trump brand. But Trump was also facing mounting legal pressures. Multiple investigations were closing in from different directions. His poll numbers were slipping in key swing states. He needed to project strength, especially when facing down a Democratic congresswoman he viewed as part of the radical left trying to destroy him. Trump's strategy was classic: attack, deflect, and overwhelm. He had successfully used this approach against seasoned politicians, veteran journalists, and even federal judges. A second-term congresswoman from Texas should be easy prey. His advisors had probably told him this would be a simple matter of intimidating another nobody Democrat. What Trump didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire life. This confrontation represented something bigger than just another political spat. It was about respect, power, and who gets to have a voice in American democracy. For Crockett, this was about proving that a black woman from the South could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful man in Republican politics and not just survive, but thrive. For Trump, this was about maintaining his image as the alpha who could dominate any challenger. If he let a freshman congresswoman push him around, it would signal weakness to his base. For America, this was about the future of political discourse. Would it continue to be about who could yell the loudest, or would substance and preparation finally matter again? The stage was set for an epic confrontation that would define both of their political legacies. The hearing started normally enough. Committee Chairman James Comer went through the standard opening procedures, outlining the scope of the investigation into federal spending during Trump's presidency. The former president appeared relaxed, even jovial, making small talk with Republican committee members who lobbed him softball questions. Mr. President, can you walk us through your administration's commitment to fiscal responsibility? Asked Congressman Jim Jordan, practically serving up a campaign commercial opportunity. Trump launched into his familiar talking points about the greatest economy in history and how his administration saved taxpayers billions. It was standard Trump, big claims, broad gestures, and his signature confidence. But then it was a Democrat's turn. Ranking Member Jamie Raskin started with pointed questions about specific expenditures. Trump's demeanor shifted slightly, less jovial, more defensive. But he handled it with his usual deflection tactics. That's fake news, Congressman. Your numbers are completely wrong. We save more money than any administration in history. When Chairwoman Crockett's 5 minutes began, the room's energy changed immediately. She didn't start with pleasantries or political grandstanding. She opened her black leather folder, adjusted her glasses, and got straight to business. Mr. Trump, I want to discuss your administration's use of federal resources for personal trips to your properties, she began, her voice calm and measured. According to Secret Service records, your administration spent $17.2 million in taxpayer funds at Trump properties during your presidency. Trump's face tightened. That's a lie, Congresswoman. A complete fabrication. Actually, it's not, Crockett replied smoothly, holding up a document. This is from your own administration's disclosure reports. Would you like me to read the specific amounts? I don't need you to read me anything, Trump snapped, his voice rising. Those reports are fake news produced by the deep state to make me look bad. Crockett didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed energized by his hostility. Mr. Trump, these aren't from the deep state. These are from the Trump administration's own Treasury Department. Are you saying your own Treasury Secretary was lying? I'm saying you don't know what you're talking about. Trump shot back, his face getting redder. You're a nobody congresswoman from some failing district in Texas trying to make a name for yourself. The room stirred. Several Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even for Trump, this was getting personal fast. But Crockett remained perfectly composed. Sir, I represent Texas's 30th congressional district, which includes parts of Dallas. It's actually one of the fastest-growing economic regions in the country. But let's stay focused on the facts. Facts? Trump exploded, leaning forward toward the camera. You want facts? Here's a fact. You got elected in some gerrymandered district because of DEI policies, not because you earned it. The room erupted. Democrats jumped to their feet shouting point of order. Republicans looked mortified. Chairman Comer banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. But Crockett sat perfectly still, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She knew exactly what Trump was doing, and she was ready for it. Mr. Trump, she said once the room quieted, her voice still calm but with steel underneath, I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Houston Law Center. I built a successful civil rights practice. I was elected by the people of my district with 73% of the vote. But let's continue with your administration's spending patterns. Trump was now fully triggered. The careful political calculation had given way to pure rage. His face had turned an alarming shade of purple, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning at Mar-a-Lago. I don't want to hear about your resume, he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. You're attacking a former president of the United States. Who do you think you are? The outburst was so intense that his own video feed seemed to shake. Behind him, you could see his staff moving anxiously just outside the camera frame. This wasn't the controlled Trump of campaign rallies. This was a man completely losing his composure on live television. "I'm a member of Congress doing my constitutional duty," Crockett replied evenly, her voice a stark contrast to his screaming. "Now, regarding the $750,000 in federal funds spent at your Doral resort." "Enough!" Trump roared, his face now purple with rage. He stood up from his chair so violently that it rolled backward, pointing directly at the camera with a trembling finger. "You know what, Congresswoman? You're a nobody. A complete nobody who got lucky in some little district in Texas. You think you can sit there and attack Donald Trump? I've built empires while you were probably still in diapers." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The room went completely silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the sound of breathing. Camera operators instinctively zoomed in on faces, capturing the shock, the disbelief, the second-hand embarrassment that rippled through the chamber. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented, a former president of the United States completely losing control on live television. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. She slowly closed her folder, removed her glasses, and looked directly into the camera. What she said next would become the most replayed political moment of the year. The silence in the hearing room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Trump sat back down, breathing heavily, his face still flushed with anger. Republicans on the committee looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Even some Democrats seemed stunned by the former president's explosive outburst. But Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly composed, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment her entire political career. She leaned forward slightly toward her microphone, her voice carrying a quiet strength that somehow commanded more attention than Trump's screaming. "Mr. Trump," she began, each word measured and deliberate, "you just called a sitting member of Congress a nobody during an official oversight hearing. You did it because I had the audacity to ask you about documented government spending at your properties." She paused, letting that sink in. "But here's what I find interesting about your response. When faced with questions about $17.2 million in taxpayer funds, you didn't provide answers. You didn't dispute the numbers. Instead, you attacked my character, my district, and my qualifications." Trump tried to interrupt. "Now listen here." "No, sir. You listen," Crockett said firmly, her voice rising just enough to cut through his bluster. "You had your time to speak. Now it's mine." The authority in her voice was unmistakable. Even Trump seemed momentarily taken aback. "You call me a nobody. Let me tell you about this nobody. This nobody grew up in St. Louis watching her mother work 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. This nobody worked nights at a hotel while putting herself through law school. This nobody spent years fighting for families who couldn't afford justice." Her voice was building now, each word hitting with precision. This nobody won a competitive Democratic primary against well-funded opponents. This nobody was elected by over 150,000 voters in her district. This nobody sits on the House Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee of the United States Congress. But most importantly, Crockett continued, her eyes boring into the camera, this nobody knows how to read financial documents. This nobody can add and subtract. And this nobody isn't afraid to ask tough questions when American taxpayers deserve answers. She picked up her folder again, opening it with deliberate care. "So let me ask you again, Mr. Trump, and this time I'd appreciate an actual answer. Can you explain why taxpayers paid $750,000 for your administration to stay at your Doral resort when there were government facilities available at no cost?" Trump's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For perhaps the first time in his political career, he seemed genuinely speechless. "I'll take your silence as an inability to answer," Crockett said smoothly. "So let me help you out with some more facts." She began reading from her documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. March 2019, $63,000 in taxpayer funds to house Secret Service agents at Trump International Hotel. June 2019, $17,000 per night at your Scotland golf resort when agents could have stayed at a nearby base for free. August 2020, $40,000 for a 2-night stay at your Las Vegas hotel. With each number, Trump's face grew darker. He kept trying to interrupt, but Crockett's commanding presence kept him at bay. "The pattern is clear, Mr. Trump. Your administration consistently chose to spend taxpayer money at Trump properties, often at rates significantly higher than government alternatives." But then Crockett shifted from the specific to the profound, and this is where she truly devastated him. "You know what really bothers me about your nobody comment, Mr. Trump? It reveals how you actually view the American people. Because I'm not here representing myself. I'm here representing 760,000 Americans in Texas's 30th congressional district." Her voice took on a moral authority that filled the room. "When you call me a nobody, you're calling them nobodies. When you dismiss my questions, you're dismissing their right to know how their tax dollars are spent. When you attack my qualifications, you're attacking their choice to send me here." She leaned back in her chair, her voice now carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "And that, Mr. Trump, is exactly the kind of elitist attitude that the American people rejected when they chose not to re-elect you in 2020. The room was electric. You could practically see the social media posts being written in real time. Trump, clearly realizing he had lost control of the situation, tried to regain his footing. "That's ridiculous," he sputtered. "I won that election. Everyone knows it was rigged." But even his election denial sounded weak after Crockett's surgical dismantling of his attack. "Mr. Trump," Crockett said with devastating calm, "you just proved my point. When confronted with documented facts about government spending, you deflect to conspiracy theories. This is exactly why oversight hearings matter." Crockett then delivered what would become the most quoted line of her career. "So, you may think I'm a nobody, but this nobody just used facts and documentation to expose how somebody used taxpayer funds for personal benefit. And unlike you, I did it without screaming, without personal attacks, and without conspiracy theories. That's the difference between governing and grifting." The room erupted. Democrats leaped to their feet applauding. Even some Republicans were nodding appreciatively, though they tried to hide it. The press gallery was frantically typing on their phones. Trump sat in stunned silence, his camera feed showing him slumped in his chair, all the fight drained out of him. Chairman Comer, looking shell-shocked himself, managed to bang his gavel. "The gentleman's time has expired." But the damage was done. In less than 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had not only defended herself against a blistering personal attack from a former president, she had turned it into a masterclass on the difference between substance and bluster. Before Crockett had even left the hearing room, her exchange with Trump was already going viral. C-SPAN's live stream viewership spiked to levels usually reserved for presidential debates. The first clips hit Twitter within minutes, with hashtags #NobodyButAWarrior and #CrockettVSTrump trending nationwide. The initial social media reaction was swift and overwhelming. Progressive activists hailed Crockett as a hero, sharing clips of her measured responses alongside Trump's red-faced outbursts. Conservative commentators found themselves in the uncomfortable position of trying to defend behavior that even they knew had crossed a line. But it wasn't just partisan Twitter that took notice. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every major network immediately shifted their programming to cover what they were already calling the confrontation of the year. Within an hour, Crockett's phone was buzzing with interview requests from every major news outlet in America. Her communications director was fielding calls from international media wanting to understand how a second-term congresswoman had so thoroughly dismantled the former president. The View wanted her for the next day. 60 Minutes was offering a Sunday slot. Stephen Colbert's people were already writing jokes. Even Joe Rogan reached out through intermediaries. But the most telling response came from Fox News Sunday, which extended an invitation despite Crockett being exactly the kind of Democrat they usually avoided. Her performance had been so commanding that even conservative media couldn't ignore it. Democratic leadership was ecstatic. Nancy Pelosi tweeted within the hour, "Congresswoman Crockett showed the nation what principled leadership looks like. Facts over fury, substance over spectacle." House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries called it a masterclass in congressional oversight. But perhaps more significantly, several Republican congressmen privately admitted that Crockett had handled herself better than many in their own party would have. One GOP member, speaking anonymously to Politico, said, "She kept her cool, stuck to the facts, and made him look unhinged. That's exactly what we need more of in Congress." Even some Trump supporters found themselves grudgingly impressed. A focus group conducted by Frank Luntz that evening found that while they disagreed with Crockett's politics, they respected her composure and preparation. Trump's team immediately went into crisis mode. Within hours, he was posting on Truth Social, trying to reframe the confrontation. Nasty Congresswoman Crockett was very disrespectful to your favorite president. She used fake numbers from the corrupt deep state. I was being audited for years, all legal. She's just trying to get famous off of me. But even his most loyal supporters could see the post lacked his usual punch. The video footage was too clear, the contrast too stark. You couldn't spin away the image of a composed congresswoman methodically presenting facts while a former president screamed and called her names. By the end of the day, Crockett's campaign had raised over $300,000 from small-dollar donors across the country. Her Act Blue page crashed twice from traffic overload. T-shirts with "Nobody but a Warrior" started appearing on Etsy within hours. But more importantly, national Democratic donors who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett were suddenly taking meetings with her staff. Progressive PACs were offering support for future campaigns. Her name was being mentioned in conversations about Senate runs and even presidential potential. The confrontation transcended politics and entered the realm of cultural phenomenon. Remix videos appeared on TikTok with millions of views. Memes flooded Instagram. Comedy shows had material for weeks. But beneath the viral moments was something more significant. Crockett had shown a different way to handle Trump's attacks, not by matching his energy or descending to his level, but by maintaining dignity while delivering devastating rebuttals. Law schools began using the clip in classes about effective advocacy. Communication professors showed it as an example of how preparation and composure could overcome bluster and intimidation. Political analysts immediately recognized that something fundamental had shifted. For years, politicians had struggled with how to handle Trump's unique combination of charisma and chaos. Some tried to out-Trump Trump. Others ignored him entirely. But Crockett had found a third way: engage him directly, but on her terms, with her weapons, facts, preparation, and unshakable dignity. Republican strategists privately worried that Crockett had provided a blueprint for how Democrats could neutralize Trump's intimidation tactics. If other politicians could replicate her approach, it could fundamentally change the dynamics of political confrontation. Democratic operatives were already reaching out to Crockett's team, wanting to understand her preparation process and communication strategy. Her approach was being studied and disseminated throughout the party. The confrontation made news internationally, with foreign media fascinated by this glimpse into American political theater. The BBC ran a segment titled "How a Texas Congresswoman Tamed Trump." Le Monde wrote about the new face of American political resistance. But perhaps most tellingly, diplomats from allied nations began requesting meetings with Crockett. They wanted to understand this rising star who had shown such skill in handling one of America's most unpredictable political forces. Within a week, Crockett's life had completely changed. She went from being a respected but relatively unknown freshman congresswoman to a national political figure. Her Twitter following increased by 400,000. Her speaking bureau was booking events months in advance. But in interviews, Crockett remained grounded about the attention. "This wasn't about me going viral," she told Anderson Cooper. "This was about showing the American people that their representatives can stand up to anyone, including former presidents, when armed with facts and truth." She used her new platform to highlight issues important to her district: voting rights, economic inequality, and criminal justice reform. The viral moment became a launching pad for substantive policy discussions. Political commentators began referring to the Crockett method: staying calm, sticking to facts, and turning personal attacks into opportunities to highlight policy differences. Other Democrats started adopting similar approaches in their own confrontations with Trump and his allies. The confrontation had shown that Trump's intimidation tactics, so effective for so many years, had a weakness. They only worked if his targets played by his rules. When someone refused to be drawn into chaos and instead responded with discipline and facts, the emperor's clothes became visible to everyone. Perhaps most significantly, the confrontation marked a turning point in how Trump was perceived by many Americans. For years, his supporters had admired his ability to dominate any room and bulldoze through any opponent. But Crockett had shown that preparation and principle could not only stand up to Trump's bluster, they could expose it as hollow theater. Focus groups show that even some Trump supporters have been uncomfortable with his nobody attack and impressed by Crockett's response. The invincible political fighter suddenly looked very human. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. Jasmine Crockett had announced herself as a major force in American politics. She had faced down the most powerful figure in the Republican Party and not just survived, she had thrived. Political betting markets now had her as a favorite for higher office. Senate leadership was courting her for prime committee assignments. Presidential campaign veterans were adding her to their list of future candidates to watch. But perhaps most importantly, she had shown young people, especially young women and people of color, that they didn't have to accept being diminished or dismissed by powerful men. They could stand up, fight back, and win, not through shouting or personal attacks, but through competence, preparation, and unshakable dignity. The confrontation that started with Trump calling her a nobody had ended with Jasmine Crockett proving she was very much somebody, and that somebody was exactly what American politics needed. In the end, the Trump-Crockett confrontation represented more than just a viral political moment. It was a demonstration of how democracy is supposed to work, with elected officials holding powerful figures accountable, regardless of their status or bluster. Crockett had shown that in America, a single mother's daughter from St. Louis could grow up to face down a former president and win, not through inheritance or celebrity, but through hard work, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to truth. That's a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of Congress, and it's why millions of Americans who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before that Wednesday morning went to bed knowing they had witnessed something special. The nobody had become somebody, and in doing so, had reminded America what true political courage looks like. If this incredible political showdown left you as amazed as the rest of the nation, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to never miss these jaw-dropping moments that are reshaping American politics. What do you think about Crockett's response? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this with anyone who needs to see how real leadership handles bullies.